Okay, so we're going to start another hi-fi podcast. This is one of the bigger ones in response to what's been a big development. A bunch of papers have been leaked that are quite significant to do, and they are to do with Ukraine. First of all, I'm here with my co-host Jim. How you doing, Jim?
Hello, long time no see. Hope you're all well.
Life gets in the way sometimes. Plus, we're working on some big things. I take it you've seen some of the news as well on this.
Yeah, some of them actually did catch my eye. Quite
Yep.
interesting stuff happening. That's one way to describe it.
I know it's ridiculous. I mean, let's just get straight to it because the what actually happened just shows how fucking ridiculous it is. I mean, it's like something out of a sitcom. So, over 100 documents were discovered on a gaming Discord server. The server was called Thug Shaker Central. 21-year-old Jack Teixeira, who's an Air National Guardsman, was arrested by the FBI. If you actually look at the footage of it, we've got the picture here in front of us. The guys in the picture are very kitted out. That is the FBI hostage rescue team. So that's...
sorry, go on.
No, go on.
I just want to say, like, of all the different places you would expect, official documents to be leaked, this is like one of the most unlikely places. The other case would be when someone leaked military information in regards to tanks just to win an argument in War Thunder, which is a war simulation game that involves tanks. And just to win an argument about that game in regards to tanks, he actually leaked official military documents. I mean, he was right at the end of the day, but still, it's like one of these things that you read and you think, is this real, or is this like some sort of plot for a comedy sketch or movie or whatever? But yeah, no, it's actually real. All the different places. Yeah.
It beggars belief. Yeah, it just sums it up. I mean, the absurdity of the situation. I wonder if this, because he's only 21, I wonder if this kid actually realised what would happen in the seriousness of what he did. I mean, for God's sake, the documents have the 2 highest classifications on them.
Yeah, that's a weird thing. It's like, I don't know. I wish we could see like the context at which he posts his document. Because I cannot imagine being on the server like, yo guys, what up? Look what I found, and pa-ting, post the documents. There must have been some sort of context or convo to which he responded with posting the documents, but I don't think we will ever find out. Or even see any of the conversations on that server.
I imagine eventually some of the members will get it out there, and the information will be there, but I couldn't find it. But going back to the actual footage as well, that arrest is pretty serious. And they said before, a Colonel Sharper, who's a former CIA official, confirmed that is actually the FBI hostage rescue team, and that's actually their standard kit, all of the tactical gear. And if you look at the photos as well, you can see some of them have got assault rifles and everything, suppressors. They look pretty SOT-modded as well.
Oh, also the Jeep itself, if I am seeing correctly, it has like a gunner at the top, a gunner position.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, so shit's serious.
I think that's actually the new car that the US Army is adopting. It's the Humvee replacement. I just can't remember what it's called. It's like the Razor or something like that.
Right. Okay.
They're not kidding around.
Apparently not.
Looking on as well, the actual arrest occurred at his home in North Dayton, Massachusetts. He's still in custody and stands accused, as of time of recording, of leaking classified documents on the Discord server. I mean, I don't know what else he expected. Basically, these leaks included what are suspected to be hard copies of slides, as opposed to a huge cache of data files, like, say, WikiLeaks. This assumption's been taken from the images themselves. If you actually look at the picture we're looking at, it's one of the documents. In the hard left-hand corner, you can see a magazine in the background. He's literally put the piece of paper, the slide itself, the suspected slide, on top of a magazine and taken a photograph of it. Interestingly enough, the US government has actually confirmed some of these are true. Obviously, they haven't said which ones. John Kirby, White House National Security spokesman, condemned the publication of the leaks without confirming the validity. of the documents. It has no business being in the public domain, he said to actual journalists, and also stated that we don't know when asked if the leaks had been contained. Biden himself has actually responded to this as well.
I can't right now. There is a full-blown investigation going on, as you know, with the intelligence community and the Justice Department, and they're getting close. I don't have an answer.
How concerned are you about this leak?
I'm not.
Are you concerned about the leak?
Well, I'm not concerned about the leak because I'm concerned that it happened, but there's nothing contemporaneous that I'm aware of that is of great consequence.
When asked if he was concerned about the leak, he just simply said, well, I'm not concerned about the leakages, I'm just concerned that it happened. Just to finish off the hat trick here before we dive into that one, the British government also responded, and we have the MOD's response. They released it on Twitter. The widely reported leak of alleged classified US information has demonstrated a serious level of inaccuracy. Readers should be cautious about taking at face value allegations that have the potential to spread disinformation. I mean, what do you think of that?
I think everyone is just shitting their pants.
Yeah.
If you read between the lines, but it is quite interesting that a leak of documents in the US it was significant enough that even the UK had to make a statement which sort of pretty much verifies that these leaked documents are actually valid. Otherwise, they wouldn't bother making a statement. I mean, the UK wouldn't bother making a statement. So, yeah, go on.
Oh, I was just going to say, we'll see why in about 10 minutes why the UK would be very concerned about these documents.
Yeah.
But yeah, you're right. I think some of them are true, if not all. And it's the fact that there's been inconsistent responses between the governments. I'm not quite sure why the US said some of them are true, some of them aren't.
Because it was the most diplomatic answer you could give. If you say none of it is true, then if either one of them gets verified, then you immediately lose trust and it's another shitstorm.
Hold on.
If you say that all of them are true, first of all, you have leaked documents that you verified that are true and that you didn't want to in the open to begin with. If by any chance one of them turns out to be not true for whatever reason, because you don't necessarily know what type of documents are leaked, again, you have a shitstorm. So, I mean, it's a lose-lose situation anyways. So the lesser of all evils was to go out and say that some of them are true without specifying which, if any, of them are true. You can say that there is at least one document that is actually true, and if it's only one, again, you said the truth. If it's all of them, again, the statement holds. So that was their only sort of it was the best solution for them in order to manage this situation.
Oh yeah, because remember as well, just based on what you've said, we're in the digital age, and a lot of this stuff could get verified in Ukraine itself by independent journalists within the next 6 months.
Yeah, the other thing is, if it's in the internet, it will stay it will stay in the internet forever. It's very difficult to just straight up delete every single result.
I want everything about my house off the internet! I'll send in detectives, I'll send in police, I'll send in everything in my power to get it off the internet!
Listen to me.
Yes.
Listen to me.
Yes.
Shut that goddamn thing off. I don't care what you do. You get all that stuff off of there tonight.
I'm working on it.
Out of it.
Yep.
Someone somewhere will have kept a copy, and if that's out there, if I save that in my PC, no matter what happens to it on the internet, I still have that copy of the document or file on my own PC.
Yep. And
if it's out, it's out.
Yep. And just to contradict what I've just said, and to be consistent as well, they are consistent with each other, the British statement and the American statement, based on what you've said, because they've both given a non-definitive answer, if that makes sense. It's neither a yes nor a no.
I mean, that's usually what politicians and the government does in general, not just in cases of crisis. Not that this is a big crisis, it is for them, but not for the general public. But it's isn't it like a joke that you can never get a straight answer from a politician?
Pretty much. You
Like,
I'm sure someone actually said to a politician once in an interview, "Is the sky blue?" And the politician wouldn't give a definitive answer on that.
I mean, yeah.
I'm sure a journalist actually did that for a joke, and the politician still, whether the politician was joking themselves. But yeah, the thing also with the British one, obviously John Kirby's statements were made to journalists, and obviously the videos went up on Twitter. The British one went out straight to the public on Twitter. The public weren't happy with that. I mean, obviously you're going to get this from people that were saying, is that a yes or a no, blah, 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 we want a definitive answer, Being of a rational mind, you and I, I mean, we're not going to get one. They're not going to say yes or no. But it did knock a few members of the public on Twitter. Moving on from the responses, though, the bigger question is, how the fuck did this kid get the clearance to actually get these documents?
That's what everyone wants to know.
According to... Oh, sorry.
Yeah, no, that's that's what I was about to say. That's what everyone is curious and wants to know.
Mm-hmm. Well, we can go into some of the possibilities, because there is some concrete things we can first put on the table.
Yeah.
According to former CIA colonels that have spoken on the internet, one of course is Tony Schaffer on Red Pill TV, but there's a few others. This kid shouldn't actually have enough clearance to get access to these documents. He was only 21. He was an Air National Guardsman, not an actual intelligence officer. The documents were classified as top secret and SCI, sensitive compartmented information. These are some of the highest markings there are for documents, if not the highest. It takes years to get the clearance to match the labels for those documents. The labels, basically your ID has to have the label matching the document. People at this level get a secret clearance, a NAC, literally an abbreviation, National Agencies Check, which allows them to access these documents up to secret. So even if he had a basic NAC, that wouldn't give him access to these two classifications that these documents were. An exact quote from the actual agency that provides these. A National Agency Check, NAC, is the minimum investigative requirement for final clearance up to secret, and for interim clearance up to top secret. So potentially the Guardsmen had some kind of special classification, which are very rare, especially at that level, to get top secret for certain categories of personnel. That wouldn't cover him up to SCI. In fact...
Unless he was a prodigy or something.
Mm.
Or unless he wasn't just a Guardsman, but we cannot know or verify that. It's just
true. Also, the fact that going back to saying it takes years to complete, I've heard a few veterans actually say that it takes more years than this kid has been alive to get the clearance. Another consistency is just as a National Guardsman, he wouldn't be in a position to have access to this level of documentation. Interestingly enough, there are 3 levels of security clearance: confidential, secret, and top secret. The fact that this airman got these documents is a real indicator that, according to some veterans, just to put forward some options on the table as to what's gone wrong, it's a real indicator something has gone wrong, as he, shouldn't have been able to get them. According to sources put forward by veterans, like, say, Colonel Schaffer of Red Pill TV, this kid actually had the tickets, in using his terminology, that this kid actually had the access, according to his sources, but, there's no verification of that, including Gamma level, to grab these documents. Even intel officers don't get this type of clearance without special vetting. Just to finish off the point, and then I'll let you tear into them, this veteran put forward one of 2 things that could be true, and I've not heard these said in the mainstream media. One of them is, number 1, things have gotten so lax now in relation to vetting and security that anyone with minimum training can get the tickets to, grab high-level documentation. He puts this down to a potential symptom of breaking down in security from the Biden administration, a laxity, just leaving documents lying around, etc. Someone can just come and pick them up. Or 2, the kid was led to them by someone and encouraged to put them out there. It's a bit conspiratorial. It's a bit of a conspiracy theory, but there might be some truth to it. What do you think?
Yeah, I think the very last possibility is probably the most probable one. The other one would be if we take as a fact that kid had the tickets, it had all the necessary documents to prove his own level to be equal to maximum in order to get access to these top secret documents. That means that he either sort of stole them somehow or got them somehow by himself, which is unlikely, or someone, as you mentioned, gave them to him and acted on his behalf to take the documents and leak them. Now, why? I think it goes back to what you mentioned to make it appear that under Biden the security is way too relaxed. So it might be because elections are nearing in America, right?
2024, I believe. No, I'd have to look at when the next American election is. I can't remember off the top of my head. It'll be 2 years
I think
from
it
now.
might be 2020. Oh, okay. So they're 2024 or 2025. I don't know.
About then.
Yeah. I do believe that it's like the most likely scenario is that someone gave him clearance on purpose so he could get the documents and leak them. But I cannot imagine as to why. It's probably a political reason, I believe. Probably an attack on Biden. It might have to do with weakening him for the next elections. But if the elections are so far away, I am not sure why they would do it now of all times. Unless there is some other reasons that are unrelated to Biden and more related to with what's happening with Russia and Ukraine. Because the content of the documents, which we'll analyze in a bit, touch upon that also. At least the ones that we've seen.
I can think of one reason why someone would want these documents in. Again, this is just a theory. Basically, I mean, we'll touch on this a bit later as well once we've started the actual analysis of the documents. There's nothing really said in these documents that's not been said on sources outside of the mainstream media. And a lot of what's in these documents people have been saying outside of the mainstream media, and they've been called misinformation, disinformation. And some of these sources, like say History Legends, Red Pill TV, which gets former army officers on and current serving, while Red Pill TV certainly has some very questionable material on it, the actual analysis of the Ukraine war, like I said, people get called conspiracy theorists for watching them, but they've been providing, at least with History Legends as well, very accurate insights into what's going on in Ukraine. In fact, History Legends has actually been calling what's been happening battle by battle before the results came in. And there's a potential here that the mainstream media is not being listened to as much as these people are, because they have way bigger audiences than a lot of the mainstream media channels. History Legends audience certainly dwarfs that of Times Radio, for example. So what someone said is, this is to create an immediate turning point in the media narrative, to bring it in line with outside sources, to basically introduce what's been happening all along, if that makes sense, so people can take the mainstream media seriously, potentially. Does that make sense?
Yes, it does, but I don't think there is someone high enough that would. Actually, that's like. Yes,
I mean,
it makes sense, especially if someone has to gain by getting, like, if it's like a trade-off deal. So I leak this document, people will trust the media more, but then you, as the media, owe me a favor. If it's something like that, then it's possible. But it is a bit of a far stretch, but I do like it as a theory.
Yeah, because what really, two things that people are using to latch onto for that one is the fact that, number one, the documents came from the chair of the Joint Chiefs or the Joint Staff, and those are very, very high level for them to come to just a normal private. But also, this completely turns the media narrative up until now on its head. If you watch a lot of CNN, NBC, I mean, remember, this is I don't think this is so much about UK news. I think this is more about American news. And if you watch CNN, NBC, you hear a lot of the Russians are 100% incompetent. Wagner's not making any ground. The Ukrainians are winning. Ukrainians are pushing Russia out. It's the complete opposite of what's actually going on. And this leak completely turns it on its head. And it's almost what I think what people are suggesting might be the case is, and again, I'm not suggesting this, I'm not sure I believe this either. It's just, the one thing I will say is, these documents pretty much prove what the outsider sources have been saying all along. And this kind of allows the narrative of the media to be more in line with what's happening with a sudden development. If that makes sense.
Yeah, Yeah, but at the same time, I don't
Mm.
believe that alone will be enough to
No.
convince people, because at the end of the day, it's the media. They always have an agenda, as
Mm.
opposed to like independent sources. Like
Mm.
hell, even YouTubers sometimes do better job at giving and
Yeah, I
presenting
would.
the news.
Yeah, I mean Willie Ohm, who's had some interviews that we've watched, that he's done some very good journalism on the Ukraine war.
Yeah,
Do you know, I'm very reserved about making any kind of judgments. It would not surprise me if this is just a case of security was so lax in these documents were just lying around.
yeah, it could be just as simple as a human error at the end of the day, and that kid, for whatever reason, just saw the opportunity, and she thought for shits and giggles that it would be funny to do it,
Mm-hmm.
and she did it. It could be as simple as that,
Yep.
but uh, we can't know because yeah, we just can't know.
The only person who knows right now is Jack Tashara himself, or
Yeah,
if the conspiracy one's right, the people who led him to get them.
yeah, but for better or worse, we're not the
Mm.
kind of people who tend to wear tin hats.
Mm.
So we
I
always, yeah, we always tend to like take these theories with a grain of
Mm.
salt.
Yep.
We'll hear them, we'll
Mm.
analyze them if it's worth our time, but always, we're always reserved because we're trying to be subjective ourselves at the end of the day.
Yeah. Like I said, just the way this has been done, it just wouldn't. I know this sounds really stupid. It just would not surprise me if a file of documents has been left out in the open, and this kid's been allowed to go into the room, and he's looked at them and saw them. You know?
Yeah, it would be so fun if at the end of the day it's something stupid like, oh yeah, so some of the higher ups wanted coffee,
Mm.
so the kid went inside to grab some coffee, and he saw that folder and he was tempted, so he just grabbed the folder and voila, documents were inside.
Yep.
Oh,
The media's response to it as well has been called into question, but I'm to be honest, I'm going to read out what some people have been saying, and I'm actually going to put forward some debunks as well, and then Jim, you can have your response to it because I know you'll tear into it. So a member of the Discord group interviewed by the Washington Times claims to have seen the documents back in January. So potentially that's how far back it goes. You would think the Department of Defense would have known about this sooner. All source intelligence like this isn't usually just left hanging around. Years ago, it wasn't even left on servers. Is what some veterans of the intelligence agency were saying. Now, I think there is some truth to that. I mean, you've got to have those kinds of protocols in place. I mean, don't get us wrong. Protocols are protocols. Human error can completely fuck them up. But it wouldn't surprise me if those protocols were actually in place. Some are saying this whole thing is a charade. So first of all, the rehearsed interview of this kid in the Washington Post, not the Washington Times. Sorry about that. The fact the news helicopters of CNN, a Biden-friendly channel, were there to film the arrest. How implausible it is that this kid got to these documents. Sorry, I'm just going through the notes as well. So those are what people are saying. This is what some veterans are saying, including one Colonel Sharper, who's been mentioned quite a few times. Like anyone, like I'll watch people and I'll watch them and I'll analyze what they say. And mostly with people, some of what they say is valid, some of it's not. I've found that I've never completely agreed with one person all the time. First of all, in relation to the interview being rehearsed, news crews do reshoots of interviews on the spot all the time. That is nothing new. I've seen it. I've seen it at the university and things like that. You'll get news channels coming up and interviewing the students, and they'll be a bit incoherent because they're on camera, and they'll tell them, do it again, do it again, do it again, to think about your answer to the question and then rehearse it. Dan Wooten, when he put flowers on the Queen's grave, took like 5 takes to do it until he got the right one. So, I don't think a witness being interviewed by a journalist rehearsing is a sign of a conspiracy theory. It's just what they do.
yeah, practicing and rehearsing for interviews is quite common, as you said.
Mm-hmm. He also put forward that the Biden administration just wants us in the headlines at the expense of a few damaged relations to distract from corruption allegations aimed at Zelenskyy and his generals. For example, there's a missing few $1 million. I think that's a lucky coincidence. I think that's something they'll be benefiting from, but I don't think data leaks. I don't think governments want this level of data leaks in, because there's stuff that the government has flat out said you can't release. They have actually put their foot down on some of them, because there's a total of 100 documents, and we've only seen about 10 or 12 publicly. The papers have seen them all, but only 10 or 12 of them have gotten them out. Don't get me wrong, I know governments do controlled leaks, it doesn't surprise me. I just don't think on this occasion that this document, this data pool has been released just so it'll get in headlines.
Not yet, but we might see it because someone might be brave enough. I mean, if this were posted on the Discord server, I guess, I don't know, maybe they could go through every single one user, find out their actual identity and hunt them down to see what they did with the documents.
As for the...
Yeah.
And also, as for the papers getting hold of them, I'm not going to lie, if I was a Discorder, playing a video game all the time, and all of a sudden I found myself in a Discord where shitloads of documents had been leaked, I mean, wouldn't you consider selling them to a newspaper?
Well, yeah. I mean, it's... yeah.
The only thing I will say is that the reason why I entertained this and brought it up on the podcast is quite a lot of army officers, like Douglas McGuire, former colonel from Desert Storm, served in Easting in Desert Storm. He also agrees with that. He also thinks it's been a deliberate leak. So that's why I thought I would entertain it, because a lot of military officials are coming out saying they think it's the type of thing that the US government would do.
Potentially.
Either way, no one can know, unfortunately. I'd like to be a fly on the wall, though, to know what is the genuine reaction to this. I mean, think about it this way as well. Zelensky's one of... There are a lot of contradictions with Zelensky that haven't made it into the headlines throughout the entire war. You know, Zelensky was put in power from... Soros, an American politician, and an oligarch that's literally just been arrested for having shark tanks in his office, they were the ones who were responsible for choosing Zelensky and backing him and getting him over in the Ukraine media. Zelensky himself is a native Russian speaker. He mispronounces Bakhmut frequently and says it in the Russian dialect. Not that that makes him a traitor or anything, but just as a native Russian speaker. Zelensky himself got elected on the basis of saying to the population of Ukraine, I will make peace with Russia, I'll talk to them. Now, he may have tried, we don't know that yet, but that was the basis of him. Add to that, let's be honest here, democracy is not something you associate with Ukraine. It's the way it shuts down protests, it shuts down gay rights, just among other things. Just lastly, the fact that he's fired one of his generals. They're saying corruption, but I mean, if you're going to fire him that general for corruption, fire the whole government for corruption. So the reason why I go off on that little tangent is corruption for Zelensky has been going on through the war, and it was going on before the war. And it never made it in the headlines before. Why would the missing millions of dollars of support, which I do believe is real, why would that go in the headlines all of a sudden, if none of the other stuff has?
Question. I think because that's like the hot topic right now, Zelensky is at the moment pretty much begging for more money to fund the war. So having a story targeting that, there is corruption in regards to where the money is going, while he's begging for more money, is a big hit, I think. Yeah,
and let's be honest as well. The media is really promoting Russia as this big. The media is really villainizing Russia, and deservedly so with this invasion. And Zelensky's the biggest poster boy you can have. Look at the way that he's running around in a military uniform.
Yeah, but at the same time, it is suspicious that he's sort of making a lot of money as well.
Oh no, it should be looked into. I absolutely agree. Like I said, I just thought if the newspapers haven't commented on any of it up until now, why would they start?
The reason why is just that, like, an attack to what he's actually trying to do at the moment. At least that's my interpretation.
I think as well they don't want to undermine him while he's at war.
For now.
Yeah, for now. So that's the analysis of how the hell it could have happened. I mean, to put it bluntly, I know we should have a nutshell point, but the answer is Jim and I don't know. No one knows right now.
No one knows yet.
A few people in government, and Jack Teixeira himself. And if you believe that,
we can only speculate and get into a weird rabbit hole that involves more and more tin hats the deeper you go. But at the end of the day, no one knows.
I mean, if you think that it is, not you, Jim, the audience. I mean, if you as an audience member think that there is some possibility that it's a well, we won't say conspiracy, but that if you think that there is a possibility that he's being led by someone in the U.S. government, that this is to distract, this is to change the narrative, or if you think there's foul play here, there's some deeper meaning than a simple fuck up, by all means drop it in the comments. Would love to hear your points. But for now, the papers and what they imply. So the papers and what they imply. So the first picture we've got, I found this at the Daily Mail, but you can basically find these just about anywhere. Again, we have to say, because of what's being said, it's if true. So if true, this one is significant because if true, it confirms that special forces personnel are operating in Ukraine, directly operating and not in a proxy way, via Ukrainian Foreign Legion. They may be in combat operations, they may be in advisory roles, or both. I mean, it wouldn't surprise me if there's more of them in there, and they've been there from the start. Looking at the actual numbers, Britain leads with 50, and the US has 14 in. France has 15, and there's a few other countries, but they don't really
So you
match.
should mention what exactly the leak entails. It entails like the number of troops being sent from its country to aid the Ukraine, if I read this correctly, yeah?
You do?
Yeah.
Total number of special forces in there reads as 100, according to the document.
From all the different countries.
Yep. Now, what we said about Britain being a bit embarrassed about this, if true, and Britain wanting nothing to do with it, it could be the 50, it could be the fact that Britain's leading in this document, because that's quite significant. The highest behind them is 17, and Britain's in the lead with 50. That's quite a large number of spec ops.
Yeah.
So I can see why Britain doesn't. I mean, I can understand why as well. Again, it wouldn't surprise me if there are more of them. It wouldn't surprise me if they've been in from the start, but that's pure speculation on my part. The reason why it's worth talking about this is this could be an escalation that spills this out of the geographical context and onto the world context. Just to make it clear, I personally don't think there's going to be World War III from this. I can't see it happening. I hope it doesn't happen. I like to think that world leaders will stop it from happening. I'm just saying it could escalate to that. Because mainly you have NATO soldiers operating in direct conflict with Russian military. It's an Jim, you and I were talking about the tanks and how scary it was that NATO tanks, despite Ukrainian crews, would be going up against the Russian military. Now we hear that Western special forces might actually be doing it.
Yeah. Fun.
And also, as well, I said before, I'm not sure this will go to a world war, but I think this is a potential, this war itself, because what these also show is that there's more intervention going on than we knew. This is a potential quagmire, or a potential stalemate war, on par with Afghanistan or Vietnam. It's good for a war economy, but bad for all the populations involved. We're already seeing from interviews with soldiers in Ukraine, speaking to Willie Ohm and other independent journalists, that NATO intervention is actually proving to be a bit ineffective in terms of distribution, and the level of equipment itself being sent, it's not really the best standard.
Can you talk to us about, I guess, you mentioned earlier on about the Australian government and what they could be doing to support but aren't doing, if that's along the right lines?
Yeah, there's a lot. So a lot of the corruption that we're seeing in Ukraine, the Australian government and I think other governments around the world could absolutely be doing more to deal with this, because it's actually quite, so I'll give you an example. So that command staff that I just mentioned, the Australian government could very easily send advisors, military attaches, and say, hey, look, we're going to give you this assistance. In return, we need some degree of accountability on the battlefield. At the moment, the way that it operates is very similar. I wouldn't say similar to Afghan, but there's a similar problem where, in the case of Ukraine, we've given them, for example, M777s, right? So we gave them a bunch of M777s, but we haven't given them the drones to spot the targets, right? And again, there's also no accountability. So we're training guys up on these systems, but there's no accountability if the system is actually destroyed. It's just sort of covered up, or not covered at all in many cases, by the Australian government. And so that creates a real big problem where effectively poor conduct is allowed to continue. And
point is, if more boots are put on the ground, this could become another Afghanistan or Vietnam. where there's basically an endless war being fought. And obviously we can't go into Russia to stop them from invading Ukraine because Russia has said that they said that they'll retaliate if their actual country is invaded.
Yeah, it's more of a when the war started, I thought it would be more of a sprint. But instead it turns into a marathon, and it's like a race as to who's going to run first out of supplies. As we said previously in a previous podcast, the different countries asked to help. They're just trying to, it's like doing a checklist, a checkbox, just saying, oh yeah, we did our part without actually putting the effort, because from the one hand, they want to appear that they're helping. On the other hand, they don't want to make an upfront enemy of Russia, if that makes sense.
Yeah.
So, yeah.
It was a similar situation actually in Vietnam, because one of the reasons why they had to stay in South Vietnam is because in North Vietnam there was a huge amount of Chinese troops there, and if the Americans had formally took ground in North Vietnam, the Chinese army would have responded.
Yeah.
Now there has been some specific White House reactions to this, but I'm more interested in what they've said in the past. This actually contradicts. For example, because remember, just the reactions, they've not said which is true and which isn't. Some of the things that have been said before. Remember, these special forces are basically NATO, American, English boots on the ground that are in direct conflict with the Russian military. Potentially, they may just be in an advisory role, but it does contradict a statement made by the at the time White House spokesperson Jen Psaki. In an NBC interview, she said, "We want to reduce the rhetoric and de-escalate."
Specific steps so that the U.S. is taking right now in response to that threat by Putin?
Well, Kristen, I think this is why it's so important for everybody to know and understand how President Putin uses rhetoric and uses threats in order to justify further military aggression. That's what we've seen him do in the past. He has never been under threat from NATO, from Ukraine, from any country. So what we want to do right now is reduce the rhetoric and de-escalate.
We want to,
as well as, we are not going to have a military war with Russia. She also said Biden has no intention to send troops to fight this war.
So I would note the president's view and his position continues to be that we are not putting U.S. troops on the ground to fight this war, and that's something we will continue to reiterate for Americans.
Thank you so much.
Everyone, to make clear, this is not a proxy war. I know that is the the Russian talking point on this, but it is not a proxy war. This is a war between Russia and Ukraine. NATO is not involved. The United States is not fighting this war, so I think it's important and vital for all of us to not repeat the Kremlin talking points on this front.
So those are some statements that are contradicted by this actual leak.
Yeah, just a bit.
Another one that might be worth talking about, actually, the special forces in Ukraine, if true, is actually the tip of the iceberg. Now, this isn't confirmed, but there's already reports coming in that there are between 10 to 20,000 Polish soldiers serving in Ukraine wearing Ukrainian uniforms. Apparently, both NATO and Russian intelligence have intercepted the radio messages between them. That's also something floating around out there.
Yeah.
That doesn't come from the leaks, though.
It all goes to it all goes to show that what you hear versus what is not always the same thing.
I know. But it wouldn't surprise me if that's all about what might come out. But because the point I'd like to make is because of these leaks. Okay, the point I think that 20,000 Polish soldiers serves is with these leaks, you are gonna hear loads of claims now. Just start coming out the woodwork.
Yeah.
If that makes sense. How many of them are true is another thing entirely. I just put forward that argument. But one thing we do factually know, though, that I think might also be worth mentioning is in the Ukrainian Foreign Legion, you have a lot of former NATO mercenaries. So you've got former US Marines, former British Special Ops, currently fighting in Ukraine directly against the Russians, but they're not doing it in British or American uniforms. They're doing it in the uniforms of the Ukrainian Foreign Legion. They're mercenaries, basically. So even if you were going to insert 20,000 Polish soldiers, and if you were going to insert special forces in, you could just do it that way. You could just put them in the Ukrainian Foreign Legion and say that they're mercenaries, and that would avoid the direct conflict. So the mechanism is there.
Yeah, it's like, oh, I know it smells like shit, but it's not shit, but it still smells like shit. It's like, yeah, based on technicality, they can get away with it more or less. But
One thing,
I think the damage is sort of done in that sense.
On a slight tangent, I think it's also worth noting as well what we were saying before about a potential quagmire, a potential war, a potential, World War III. There's also the potential that Ukraine will lose. And
I think it's given that Ukraine will lose.
yeah, I mean, Russia right now has a 250,000 strong army ready to go in. They're just waiting for the ground to freeze over fully because they don't want the tanks caught in the mud.
Yeah, and also, yeah, but like, as I said, because it's more like a race against who's going to run out of supplies, I think Ukraine will run out of supplies first.
Oh, yeah. I actually plan to go into that a bit later, actually, because I've got some stats for that. But the quick point I was going to make as well is just, personally, as to the value of the mercs, the thing about mercenaries is they're not covered under the Geneva Convention. So when it looks as though the Russians, if it does cut to a point where it looks as though the Russians are going to take Ukraine, I think what you'll find is that Western mercenaries will probably pull out, like, altogether.
Yeah, most likely, because now that it got out that they sent troops, they start dying, then that might have other implications. But yeah.
So there's a second paper. I couldn't actually find a copy of it, unfortunately, but obviously newspapers are talking about it. So while I couldn't find the exact paper for this, the New York Times has confirmed that the papers have leaked that the US is supplying intel from inside Russia to Ukrainians. While Putin and the Russian intelligence services most likely suspected this, it's not something you would want leaked. The New York Times also backs the stalemate scenario, as the Americans are actually, the Americans are preparing for it. Their logistics are apparently showing that there's going to be a stalemate battle for the Donbass, and they're getting ready for a long war. To go even further, there is still the 250,000 troops wanting to come in once the mud freezes over, the Russian invasion force, and with the casualties the Ukrainians have taken, figures between 98 and 120,000, and also footage of troops in Bakhmut basically saying that the war's lost. I mean, there's literally footage of troops basically just saying we're fucked.
І що я можу сказати? В самому пеклі, блядь. Якщо, блядь, пару днів, блядь, нас не виведуть, нам всіх пизда. Уже майже половини людей нема. Ніхуя у нас нема, артилерії нема. Нас сиплять мінами, блядь, пизда. Кольцо скоро закриється. І нам пизда. Ось така ситуація в Бахмуті.
Думки їбануться просто, які думки, блядь. Піхота лягає, що нахуй, що не знаю. Просто, піхоту нашу б'ють, блядь, що, блядь, слов просто немає. У нас є мужики, блядь, які були там кілька днів в піхоті, блядь. Кажуть, виходять, блядь, русські як на зайчиків, блядь, і все.
Ну їх же кладуть чи ні?
Кладуть, звісно, блядь, но тим не менее вони виходять, блядь, більш підготовлені. Пацанов, блядь, по 3 дня привозять, нахуй. 3 дня, блядь, на Харків завезли, от були, блядь, 2 рожка вистріляли, нахуй, Бахмут, штурмове підрозділення. Та йобаний в рот, що за штурмовики, блядь? За 3 дня якого можна штурмовика зробити?
Ложки, ви ж теж лишнього ненавидите.
Та що лишнього?
Чугисы уже на статью опять забалакал.
Та мені похуй, ну я що.
Оля мне 2 раза перезвонила, говорит, точно не наши выходы?
Свобода слова є в країні?
Я все равно контракт, мы еще 3 года.
Ну, мені ще от контракта, мене нікуди не відпустять.
Наши с той стороны.
Check out this Ukrainian squad sitting on top of some BMP, driving past an entire destroyed Ukrainian armored column. As they're slowed down by the mud, I can count roughly 15 Ukrainian soldiers on this vehicle. They're overlooking the remnants of some of their comrades, 1 destroyed tank, 1 truck, and 2 armored vehicles.
And like you've got platoons of like you had units of like 100 dudes completely reduced to like 3 guys, and they're basically just saying they're fucked. We could be looking at a scenario where the writing on the wall will be for the collapse of the Ukrainian army, and it could lead to the question of what will happen when it looks like Kyiv is on the verge of being lost.
Yeah, it's very difficult to predict what could happen. Because it's like all ifs and scenarios, but this again it's more of a wait and see scenario.
Yeah, at the very least, it shows what we were saying before. It looks like I'm not going to say it could be a forever war, or at the very least, it looks like it's not going to end in a while. The reason why the Donbass, by the way, is just for the audience. The reason why the Donbass is so important. It's one of the biggest economic centers of Ukraine. It's quite vital for the future of the country that they hang on to that. Just some more stats about the actual war itself. If you want a more detailed picture of the current situation, the Russians are effectively firing 60,000 rockets a day, and the Ukrainians are only firing 15 to 20,000 back. Reports are coming in. Ukraine is down to 190,000 effective troops. while Russia has that force of 250,000 waiting to go in. The numbers of casualties are about 1,900 a day. 6,000 apparently died in January. The current NATO forces and current NATO armies, they're not used to wars that have this level of casualties, because they haven't had a war like this since World War II, really.
Yeah.
Where their own side takes, because even Vietnam, while it went on for a long time, the actual death rates in Vietnam, they're not actually as high as you would think. I'm sure I read a statistic where, no, I'm not going to repeat that because I can't remember the exact thing. This is a point that's just come to me. But yeah, even Vietnam, the death rates weren't that high. Just to make a quick editorial here, as I feel there was a bit of a Steven Seagal moment from myself, I feel this point could have been explained a bit more clearly. What I meant to say was that the US and NATO armies have not sustained casualties like that which are being sustained by the Ukrainian army since Korea and World War II. Vietnam started in 1955 and ended in 1975 with 40,000 plus KIA confirmed, and that conflict, was longer than Ukraine. In Ukraine, we are already getting casualty counts of 6,000 in the space of a month, and NATO armies aren't used to taking those kinds of casualty counts in the modern era. We go into more detail about this in part 2, which this is the first time where potentially this is the first time we've seen a war where it's this bad.
I mean, yeah, the last big war was like World War II, and since then so many different things have changed.
Maybe Korea.
So yeah, oh yeah, I forgot about that. But the point what I'm trying to make is things have changed, and this war was unexpected. In a sense, at least from NATO's side, it was unexpected. So they were caught off guard.
But with that point, you actually discovered an interview made back in 2019 where someone did predict this. And one thing these papers reinforce, along with the sheer devastation of Ukraine's infrastructure, for which there is countless testimonials and a lot of footage of the Russians actually doing it, there are in terms of destruction of the infrastructure, there are actually reports of thermobarak weapons being deployed. So you could argue that there is an intention of the Russians to demolish Ukrainians' infrastructure. They are going for energy suppliers. They are going for factories. They are going for key assets to their economy. They are looking for utter destruction of the country. The interview you found was by a former Zelenskyy advisor, Oleksiy Arestovych. I hope I pronounced that correctly. Do you want to talk a bit about that?
Yeah, basically, the interview wasn't obviously in English. There are subtitles, and some of it is redacted because the sound quality is a bit poor. So whoever made the translation couldn't fill in all the gaps. But the gist of it was that whatever actions they were taking back then in regards to joining NATO, they knew that would result in them being invaded by Putin.
Yep.
То есть, если Украина получает ПДЧ в НАТО, то тогда мы можем говорить о каких-то сроках прекращения войны.
Нет, ни о каких сроках прекращения войны мы не будем говорить. Наоборот, это, скорее всего, подтолкнет крупные военные операции России против Украины. Потому что они должны нас будут просадить в инфраструктурном отношении и превратить здесь все в разваленную территорию для того, чтобы нас неохотно брали.
То есть Россия сможет пойти на прямую конфронтацию с НАТО?
Конечно. Нет, не НАТО. Мы не Они должны это сделать до того, как мы вступим в НАТО, чтобы мы не были интересны НАТО. Перестали быть интересны, как разваленная территория. С вероятностью 99,9% наша цена за вступление в НАТО – это большая война с Россией. А если мы не вступим в НАТО, это поглощение России в течение 10-12 лет. Вот и вся вилка, в которой мы находимся. А теперь давайте выбирайте Зеленского.
Подождите, а теперь если поставить чашу на весу, а что лучше в таком случае?
Конечно, крупная война с Россией и переход в НАТО по результатам победы над Россией.
А что такое может быть крупная война с Россией?
Это воздушная операция наступательная, вторжение российских армий, 4, которые они создали на наших границах, там осада Киева, попытка окружить войска, которые в АТО находятся, ВОЗ, в операции Объединенных сил, прорыв через Крымский перешейк, выход на Новокаховское водохранилище, чтобы воду в Крым дать, наступление с территории Беларуси, там, создание новых народных республик, диверсии, удары по объектам критической инфраструктуры и так далее, воздушно-десантный. Вот что такое полноценная война. И вероятность ее 99%.
Когда?
После 21-22 самые критические, 20-22 самые критические эти самые.
So they knew it from back then. I'm pretty sure, like, We will include the link of that interview if you want to see the whole of it yourself. It's a relatively small interview, but yeah, we will include the link to that if you want to see it in the description. But it is quite interesting because everyone was acting like this happened out of nowhere and they were out of guard, but they knew it 2 years ago.
Yeah.
2 years before the invasion happened.
Yeah, the guy even predicts the exact year. He says 21 to 22. He gets the year right.
Yeah.
And he also goes on further to say that the intention would be to destroy Ukrainian infrastructure before they became a NATO state in order to make them uninteresting or uninvestable to the point where NATO would lose interest in them. Bear in mind that BlackRock, just to add a fact here, BlackRock has got a contract with Zelenskyy to rebuild Ukraine. Whether they can actually meet the sheer scale of the destruction, because that was a while ago, is another thing. He basically said, he puts forward that it's a fork in the road. It's either this protracted war with Russia, where Russia's eventually pushed out, Ukraine is completely leveled as a country, and they then join NATO, or they don't join NATO, and within 10 to 12 years, they get absorbed into Russia. That's basically what he was saying that Zelensky's thinking was, as he was putting forward the advice. I've got to say, he hasn't been wrong about the way the conflicts went. He did predict that they would go for the Donbass, they would go for other parts of the country, they would go to destroy energy factories, they would go to destroy power plants, they would go to destroy a lot of infrastructure, and the key point he emphasizes is infrastructure. They would destroy the infrastructure. If you also look at what the Russians have done, a lot of Ukrainians have left Ukraine, and they don't want to go back. So, yeah, I completely agree that a lot of people say it's come out of nowhere, but there were people who predicted this.
Yeah.
The New York Times, one senior Western intelligence official summed up the disclosures as a nightmare. Dmitry Pilovich, the Russia-born chairman of Silverado Policy Accelerator, who was best known for pioneering work in cybersecurity, said on Sunday that he feared there were a number of ways this can be damaging. He said that included the possibility that Russian intelligence is able to use the pages spread out over Twitter and Telegram to figure out how we are collecting the plans of the GRU, Russia's military intelligence service, and the movement of military units. I mean, that's, we were talking about the predictions of the war and stuff, but that's also a big one. The fact that they can try and they might narrow down where the American assets are in Russia, and they might actually find them, which is a damn good reason why you wouldn't want this stuff public.
Yeah.
Because the Americans, they've always had assets in Russia, and they've always been highly classified. So
Yep.
That's one thing that makes me think these leaks aren't intentional.
True, unless it is intentional, and it's America's way saying to Russia, look, we're sort of your friends. Here's a bit of something for a truce or something like that, But,
I mean, if you want to go in real smokes and mirrors, maybe this is all fake information and they're trying to put false leads out.
True. That also might be the case.
But yeah, it's particularly damning. Leaked Paper 3. Unless there's something else you want to say on that one.
No, not really.
Okay. Leaked Paper 3. This one is obviously air defense statistics, but specifically it reveals that US officials believe that Ukraine air defenses will be completely depleted by the end of May. And at that point, the Russians will start committing more air power to the conflict. A lot of interviews with Western members of the Ukrainian Foreign Legion talk about the reluctance of Russia to use more of their air force and believe the war will go badly for Ukraine if they do.
Seeing this area war going ground and trying to stay unseen rather than trying to hit it.
Yeah.
How much are they using their fast hit? Because, as far as fighter jets, bombers, one of the gentlemen, another foreign fighter I had on here, he said that the Russians are using a lot of their ground equipment, soldiers' armour, but he said they're really holding off on their air force, and he said that he doesn't really know why they're doing it. But have you had much experience with the fast air assets Russia has?
Yeah, I haven't seen much. Yeah, I mean, it sounds, from what I've seen, it sounds a lot like what he said, where their air is kind of pulled back. I don't know the logic behind it, but I've only seen fixed wing a couple times, and they weren't doing much. So it was more of like we would do in the Corps, like a show of force kind of thing.
And does that in any way concern you that Russia may be holding back that equipment that it may not be, because a lot of people hold the idea that it's incompetence, they're not using it, or the equipment is broken down and not as up to scratch as it may be thought. But is there any concern of like this is part of their tactic and that stuff will be deployed to what the power we may have thought Russia was before this war?
Yeah, I think it's more concerning than anything not seeing it, because you usually play your last card best, so just waiting for it to come out. To me, I'm concerned why they're not utilizing more fixed wing or air, so I guess we'll find out in the future.
Yeah. And to what effect are these
Fighter jets and bombers may actually turn the tide of the war on the ground and strike a major blow to the spring offensive. Again, it's maybe the date wasn't in the public, but it's not really a revelation.
Yeah, I mean, we already knew that this is basically a marathon, as we said earlier, as to whoever is gonna run out of supplies and manpower. And at that point, I personally weigh towards Ukraine being the country that will first run out of, resources, considering that Zelenskyy is still actively pleading for more from everyone.
Yeah.
So yeah, this isn't, as you said, a big revelation. This was just what most people suspect and believe, anyways.
Yeah, I completely agree. In relation to the air defenses, everything in Ukraine has the risk of running out. I've got to say, I didn't think it would be as early as May. I thought NATO supplies would maybe keep them going a bit longer than that. But as we've heard on the ground, NATO intervention's been quite ineffective. I don't even think any of the tanks have arrived yet.
Yeah, I mean, it was always a matter of time, and wars are expensive. I think even Russia pays a few millions a day or some ridiculous like that.
Oh yeah,
like for the war.
Yeah, this war is bankrupting them and tanking their economy. Make no mistake.
Yeah, so I mean, yeah, Russia has an economy, a strong economy, but it still is costing them on top of the whatever sanctions we put, well, the EU put. Yeah, at the moment, I believe still Russia's economy is quite stronger than Ukraine's.
Oh yeah.
Even with all the support that they have received.
I mean, the Ukrainian economy is more or less shut down.
It was more or less shut down before the war.
Yeah. I don't really have much left to say really on the air defense one, because that one's pretty straightforward. You got anything else you want to say?
No. I mean, I don't see NATO supplying anti-air vehicles and defense systems, and even if they did, the amount of time it would get there safely probably would be problematic, and it wouldn't get there on time, or it wouldn't get there at all because it could be sabotaged or whatever. But yeah, I don't have anything else to add in that specific area.
The thing is on the spring offensive as well, just a quick one, the way that if the spring offensive isn't a feint and they actually are planning an offensive, why announce it?
Tact? Maybe psychological warfare?
Maybe force them to commit, maybe force the Russians to commit forces in certain areas. Hopefully it's something like that, because we saw this in Iraq, where they, instead of just invading and having it come out of nowhere, they kept on saying, we're going to invade in a week, we're going to invade in